Maestri has spent the past 2 seasons as an assistant for Wimp Sanderson at Alabama. He's a graduate of Southern Mississippi and spent 10 years as a successful high school coach in his hometown of New Orleans. In taking over the Trojan program, he had a tough decision to make. He said it wasn't easy leaving a successful program like Alabama.
They made me feel extremely important and very special, but they also encourage you to make a step up when you can, and they backed me 100%, and I'm really grateful to them and appreciate everything they've done for me. But I'm excited about Troy State University position and looking forward to getting to work.
Maestri inherits a Troy State team that finished 11-13 last year, part of the reason that former coach Wes Bazilia was dismissed after 9 seasons. Maestri says his Trojan squads will be good defensively and play a run-and-gun offense, but he says they must get busy recruiting.
The assistant coaches, Coach Felix and Coach Lang, have maintained it in the last month or so, and the kids that we were involved with are interested in meeting the new head coach and finding out something about him. So that's the top priority, to try to get us 2 or 3 players right now.
Reporting from Troy, Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
Well, of course, we've got to shore up the defense. This really is what you win with, and of course you got to score points too. But if the defense can go out there and maintain good field position and punish the opposition physically, and it kind of sets a tone for the aggression of your football team. So we were like a sieve in some areas back in our defensive secondary, basically to shore up fundamentally, to get stronger defensively than what we were, and to get some needed experience to a young quarterback who's a very capable person as well as just a super young athlete.
We're going to have a very entertaining program. We're not going to guarantee anything but 40 minutes of grounding people. And I'm really excited. Can't wait to get started. And matter of fact, we'll start today on some of the things that, but I'm not going to get involved with anybody they're recruiting. State University, this is what we're going to do. We're going to keep, talked about this last night. There'll be a very proud group of kids. They'll show tremendous sportsmanship. And they'll be the type of individuals in the group.
I've got to fight every living moment of my life wondering, when is Jerry Lee Jones going to be paroled? When is Eddie Bernard Neal going to be paroled? And you say, don't worry, Muir, they're not going to let somebody like that out of the streets. They do it every day. Why am I scared? I'm scared to death. Stay for the night.
Mrs. Sheehan's story is tragic but familiar. Trial after trial because of appeals or technicalities, and no justice. What can be done? Marion Thompson, whose son was murdered 4 years ago, says juries forget about the victims and that the judicial system leans toward the criminal. Montgomery County District Attorney Jimmy Evans says victims need compassion, dignity, protection, and information. He says victims should be a part of the entire trial process, and they should be visible in the courtroom. What rights do victims have? Very few compared to criminals, but these legislators, law enforcement agents, and victims say they're trying to change things. They say the criminal justice system has improved over the past couple of years, but they say it has a long way to go before victims are treated with the same dignity and respect as criminals. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
I feel very proud, and down here I got to meet 2 or 3 people, and I had an immediate feeling of want to get involved with anybody they're recruiting. If we have no. But I really feel that we'll have a great future. My philosophy about basketball and about the program in general is pretty simple. It involves discipline and hard work and unity. We'll have a lot of people involved in our program, and it involves positive thinking, which I think is probably going to be the main part of our program.
When the advisory opinion is given next month, it will affect several legislators who also serve in an educational capacity. Representative Curtis Smith of Chilton County requested the opinion. He's the county director of vocational education as well as a member of the legislature. The Ethics Commission members did not rule on the request today because they were told a much broader opinion would be needed covering all legislators who also serve as educators. Ethics Commission Executive Director Melvin Cooper says another reason for deferring the issue is because of its magnitude.
That's going to be a very significant opinion. It's going to have far-reaching ramifications. So we determined that we will work very closely with the Attorney General's office in arriving at that opinion.
But the commission did rule on a similar issue today involving a State Employees Association worker who wants to run for a seat in the legislature. I'll have the commission's opinion tonight at 10. The Ethics Commission's April meeting is expected to be quite informative. That's when the commission will issue its opinion concerning legislators involved in the education process. The opinion will affect about 40 state lawmakers. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the Capitol. The Ethics Commission decided that a person who works for the Alabama State Employees Association can run for the legislature. If elected, the lawmaker can introduce, debate, serve on committees dealing with ASEA, and urge passage of bills affecting the association. But the commission said the lawmaker accrued financial gain from legislation affecting the State Employees Association. He must divorce himself from the issue.
You do not vote in favor of any bill which would increase your own salary if it passes. And of course you heard the gentleman, he said that simply would not happen.
At next month's meeting, the commission will decide if it's okay for lawmakers to be involved in both legislative and educational capacities, an opinion that will affect about 40 lawmakers. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
door will close. You going in there?
This is 8 tons of pot, more than 29,000 pounds total weight, including the truck. Agents took the marijuana to Union Camp in the same truck they confiscated Tuesday night. The marijuana was still tied in bales. As the bales were lifted off the truck, they were counted. Each one weighs about 50 pounds, so the unloading was a slow process. Before the bales were put on the conveyor belt, they were ripped open. Agents checked for other drugs that might be hidden inside. They were also looking for explosives. The bales were chopped in half and fed into the incinerator. The temperature varies, but this one is running at 1,500 degrees, plenty hot to burn marijuana. Why use a paper mill incinerator to burn the drugs? Agents say the quantity and tightly packed bales figured into the picture. They also say that at normal dump sites where drugs are burned, some gets buried and isn't destroyed. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News, Prattville.
PSC attorney Yul Screws outlined a 12-point plan that would stabilize electrical rates in the state. Under the plan, the PSC would allow the utility to receive gradual rate increases until the power company reaches an agreed-upon return of equity range. The limited increases or adjustments would be automatic until the power company reaches the equity range. And if the power company exceeds that range, it would have to automatically lower rates. The plan would bypass long and drawn-out rate cases currently heard by the PSC. Also under the plan, the power company would be granted a $150 million rate increase it's now collecting under bond, and would allow the power company to seek one additional rate increase in 1982. The power company would be locked into the small adjustments from 1983 until the end of 1984 without seeking a major increase in rates. Most of the parties involved in the power company rate cases seemed optimistic about the concept, but reserved approval of the plan until hard figures are plugged into the rate of equity range. They'll try to do that tomorrow when negotiations resume at the Public Service Commission. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
Montgomery County Assistant School Superintendent Maggie Walker says the total amount of federal budget cuts isn't available at this time, but she predicts 42% of the money the county now receives from the federal government will be cut. Mrs. Walker says that all depends on Congress and salary and benefit increases from the state. But she says her office is trying to trim the programs now. Montgomery County is one of the few school systems in the state that still has a summer school program. Mrs. Walker says this summer there will be fewer teachers and fewer student slots available. But she says there's a possibility there will be no summer school at all if the federal cuts are approved. She says there's also the possibility that the night school program will be eliminated. In other action, the board approved the YMCA's request to sell the South Y building to the city of Montgomery. The building will be used as a therapeutic recreational center for the handicapped, and the board decided to hire Woodham and Sharp architects as consultants on the school system's asbestos problem. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
The Huntington Classic began this morning with Warren Wilson College of Asheville, North Carolina, beating Kentucky State 3-2. In the second game, host Huntington was a 5-1 winner over Kentucky State. The Hawks put 2 on the board in the top of the fifth when shortstop Bill Beard wrapped this double, driving in Donnie Kaysen and Tim Ward, making it 5-0 Huntington. Also getting RBIs for the Hawks were Tim Ward, Keith Bellick, and Lee Homison. Winning pitcher Keith Tomlinson went the distance to record his 5th win against 2 losses. He just missed the shutout in the top of the 7th when Jim Boyle scored for Kentucky State on this error by the shortstop. The Hawks made it 2 straight in Game 3 with a 5-0 win over Warren Wilson. Bottom of the 2nd, first baseman Doug Singleton opened with a double and then went to 3rd on a sacrifice and scored on this passed ball, making it 1-0 Hawks. Designated hitter Paul Cope then got on with a walk, advanced to 2nd on a wild pitch, and scored when Terry Wallace ripped this 2-out single. Center fielder Mark Jackson added a 2-run homer in the 4th, and Donnie Kaysen wrapped a 2-run triple in the 5th for all the Hawks' runs. Freshman Tommy Wax picked up the win. He goes to 3-0. Huntington improves their overall mark to 16-7. The Classic continues tomorrow morning at 11. Warren Wilson meeting Kentucky State. Huntington takes on Warren Wilson at 1 and then meets Kentucky State at 3. Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
For nearly 12 hours, opponents of the current use tax proposal used every available delaying tactic to prevent the measure from coming up for debate. Representative Rick Manley, who sponsors the bill, says his proposed tax formula change will give a break to farmers and landowners. But opponents of the bill say the biggest break will come for large corporate landowners and not the small farmer. The opponents also say the state's current tax structure is fair and much less complicated than the formula offered in Manley's bill. Education interests are also interested in killing the bill, since this proposed current use bill would have an impact on local property taxes, which are primarily used to fund education at the local level. The opposition to the bill are in the minority, but their spirit held for most of the day as they talked about everything from basketball, college sports recruiting violations, high school bans, anything to kill time. At about 8:30, an agreement was struck allowing the filibuster to end with the condition that current use come up again next Tuesday. The leadership reportedly promised those who opposed the bill every opportunity to offer changes and filibuster again. Some of those in favor of the bill voiced fear that if the issue was put off too long, Governor James could effectively veto the bill, as he has promised to do, without the legislators having a chance to override before the session ends. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Under the plan submitted by the Public Service Commission, after 2 rate increases this year, one of which the power company is currently collecting under bond, the utility would be limited to small quarterly adjustments in its rates. The adjustments would be geared to a return on equity range. Once the power company reached the equity range, rates would remain constant, and if the utility exceeds the range, it would be required to file a rate reduction. Public Service Commission President Billy Joe Camp says a new concept, if approved, would allow power company customers to budget their electricity bills.
And I can envision a time in the future now when we could have rates stable with no increase for long periods of time.
Tomorrow, real negotiations begin when the people involved in the proposed plan will attempt to nail down the price tag to consumers and the power company for the plan. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
Shortly, the jury in the murder trial of Clarence Womack should begin deliberating. Womack is the man charged with robbing and murdering 70-year-old Arthur Bullock of Montgomery, who ran the city curb market here. Dan Black of our staff is at the Montgomery County Courthouse for this live report. Dan, what's gone on so far today, and what is the status of the proceedings right now?
Well, Bob, the defense called a total of 7 witnesses to the stand today, most of which were Montgomery police officers who were questioned about alleged beatings of Womack. One of the main witnesses was police officer D.H. Carmichael, who Womack had accused, along with several other officers, of beating him on the night that he was questioned concerning the city curb market robbery. However, Officer Carmichael told the court that the questioning had been done after he was off duty and had gone home, and he denied any involvement in any alleged beating of Womack. During closing rebuttal arguments, the prosecution called Montgomery police officer Ralph Connor to the stand. He testified that he overheard a conversation between Womack and his attorney Red Bell during a preliminary hearing, at which time Officer Connor testified that Bell asked Womack if any of the officers standing nearby in the same room had been involved in beating him. Connor stated that Womack pointed to him. However, Connor told the court that he had never even been assigned to that case. In earlier testimony, Womack had accused investigator R.T. Ward of beating him as well, and also of pre-writing a confession and then forcing him to sign it. Ward denied both the beating incident as well as the pre-typed confession. During closing arguments, Assistant District Attorney Jim Williams told the jury that the case was a clear-cut case, and it would be a mistake to return with anything less than a guilty verdict in this capital murder case. Judge William Gordon has begun the charging of the jury and is expected to be finished with that within a matter of minutes, and is expected to let the jury have a supper hour, and then they will be back to deliberate. Bob?
Okay, thanks very much, Dan. We'll have more on that tonight at 10 o'clock.
Good afternoon, I'm Gina Gregory. First Alabama Bank at 901 Adams was robbed within the hour. Kim Davis is standing by live now with this report. Kim?
Gina, the bank was robbed between 11 and 11:15 this morning, and I have standing with me Mr. Marvin Brokaw, a bank official at First Alabama Bank. And Marvin, let's talk about the robbery. What happened?
As you said, Kim, about 11:15, a lone black male came into the Adams Avenue branch, approached a teller window where we had a teller and a teller trainee, told them that he had a gun and to give him the money. They, of course, complied with his request. He got what money he could and turned and exited the bank on foot. No one was hurt. There was no panic. It was over in probably 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay. What did he say when he came into the bank this morning?
When he came up to the teller window, he told the tellers that were in the window that I have a gun, give me your money. Is my understanding of what he said, which they immediately did.
And as you say, no one was injured. Were the cameras activated and proper security measures taken?
The cameras were activated. They're in now unloading them to develop the film and see what we got. Other security measures were taken and just right down the line according to procedure.
Okay, Marvin, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Gina, also, police picked up a man that fit the description of the robbery suspect. He was brought into the bank a short time later, but tellers did tell police that he was not the suspect, and police are still looking for him, and the amount of money taken is undetermined at this time. Gina?
Thanks, Kim.
2 very controversial bills tied up the legislature today, both the House and Senate. Chris Grimshaw reports that the current use property tax issue is still before the House of Representatives, while the revamping of control of higher education is holding up the state Senate. Chris is standing by at the Capitol for this live report on the debate. Chris, what's happening?
Well, Bob, the House is locked up at this time in a series of filibusters by a handful of representatives, and those filibusters are intended to delay for as long as possible any debate on the current use bill. That current use bill is being proposed as setting up a new formula that would provide a lower tax rate for a number of residences, and Representative Rick Manley, who is sponsoring the bill, claims that it would set up a new formula that would provide a fair taxation for property for what it is currently being used for. But those who are opposed to the bill claim that the state's current tax formula are already providing a fair type of taxation, and that the current use bill would only reduce taxes for those large landowners who live in rural areas. Property taxes are scheduled to go up by some $125 million this September through a reappraisal program, and that should increase taxes by some $125 million. But current use would reportedly reduce that $125 million increase by about $12.5 million. AEA is particularly interested in defeating this bill since schools get much of their local support from property taxes. Earlier today, the Senate was locked in a debate over a bill that would provide the Commission of Higher Education with a new name and power over all existing programming at universities, power invested by the state constitution. But several senators have managed to leave the powers invested leave the commission vested into the state constitution, but they have taken the part granting it power over the programs out of the Constitution. Governor James' office says that those powers over programs will come in a separate bill later on. The Senate has already left for the day, but the House is still embroiled in its debate and its filibusters over the current use, and is expected to do so for quite a bit of this evening until both sides can watch and see who will give out on steam or patience first. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News, reporting live from the Capitol.
Thanks, Chris.
The complaint charging DuBose with racial discrimination was filed on March the 8th. Commissioner Jim Folsom said 4 of the 6 complainants worked out a settlement with DuBose's attorney and would not seek a hearing on the complaint. The settlement was reached last night, and it wasn't until this afternoon that the other 2 complainants, Hezekiah Wagstaff and Frederick Franklin, also decided not to press for a hearing on the matter. In a letter to the 3 public service commissioners, Wagstaff and Franklin said they still refuse to sign the agreement and that a lack of a public hearing into the matter failed to solve the problems at the PSC.
With you, if I may be candid, I think the whole matter has been literally swept under the rug. I think the allegation that were made, we had evidence. We would have been able to sustain our charges had there been a public airing of this issue, or at least some formal basis for airing them. And I think it was incumbent upon the commission to make a determination whether our allegation were in fact real and could be substantiated.
Wagstaff and Franklin say they didn't press for a hearing in the best interest of the PSC. Franklin did say there would be more to come from an investigation into the charges.
And that report has turned up some startling things to the point that there might be criminal charges brought. So not only was that discrimination that affecting our job, but it had got to the point where it was causing personal damage to certain people around here.
Wagstaff and Franklin say the alleged criminal charges could stem from the willful destruction of private property, namely cars parked at the state building. The PSC staffers declined to go further into what the investigation has turned up. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
Bronner says Alabama is the first state to offer its teachers such a plan. He says once it's implemented, teachers' paychecks will go up 2 to 3%.
You will pay taxes not on your $10,000, but $10,000 less the contribution to the retirement system, which is $500. So you will pay federal income taxes on $9,500. Therefore, the money to you, your take-home, your check, will go up from 0.5% to 2% depending on your individual tax bracket.
Bronner credits the University of Alabama for devising this plan that will only affect federal income taxes. Bronner says there's no doubt about it. This is a tax loophole for teachers and state employees. He says for now the plan probably won't work for private sector employers, but it could sometime later on. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News. Bronner says he'll take his new loan program to mortgage bankers in Alabama first. He says he's going to try to generate some $20 to $30 million in new mortgages.
It's called a GEM mortgage. It'll be the first one done in the country. It's going to be 100% insured. It's going to be rated AA by Standard & Poor's. We're going to put everything on top of the table, and the way I'm going to do that is by letting them competitively bid for the money. And we've set a floor price, but the price will probably be higher as far as yield goes to us than the floor price.
Bronner says his new mortgage plan will benefit young families in particular. It'll allow them to buy a house at a low monthly payment, but have those payments increase every year. He says what's different about this loan compared to others that escalate is that these payments will go toward the principal rather than the interest. Bronner says his mortgage plan will allow individuals to pay off their loan in 13 years, unlike conventional mortgages that usually take 30 years. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Montgomery police say the number of child abuse cases for the first 3 months of this year is up over last year. Investigator Jametta Gordine says the victims range in age from 1 month old to 18 years. She says a number of factors have contributed to the increase.
As we discussed, I feel that it's the economy. More people are out of work. Summertime, heat has a lot to do with it.
Sergeant Mike Ferrier says there's no way to label a potential child abuser. He says any and all personality types can be guilty of this crime. Ferrier says most child abusers are relatives of the victim or friends of the family. Ferrier says if an individual knows of any violent or sexual act against a minor and doesn't report it, the individual can be sentenced to a jail term. If you know a child who's been abused, call the Montgomery Police Youth Aid Division at 832-4400 or dial the secret witness number 262-4000. Cassandra Taylor, WSFA TV News.
Notice that and work both on the technical aspect and the conceptual aspect at the same time. The rate itself, CPI. During the settlement period. Total rate of that.
Yesterday, the power company fired 8 linemen who participated in the one-day wildcat strike last November 23rd, suspended 90 workers for 5 days, 570 workers for 2 to 5 days, and sent letters of reprimand to 2,200 workers. That action prompted the lawsuit, which claims the electrical workers were improperly disciplined after an agreement not to punish the workers was signed by both the power company and the union. The center of the dispute is the company's program to train electrical workers to handle live power lines in excess of 4,000 volts. That's what started the strike, but workers were ordered to report back to work the next day. They did, but the dispute continued, and so did the new training program. In a letter dated December 4th, both parties agreed to continue training the linemen until an arbitration board settles the power company's gloving policy. Linemen were required to be trained, but not to handle the energized lines until the question of the training program is resolved. The arbitration board is scheduled to meet next month. But IBEW officials claim the power company reneged on its December 4th agreement not to take any disciplinary action against the workers until the gloving policy is resolved. But power company officials say they never waived their right to discipline the strikers and say the agreement between the union and the utility made no promise of withholding disciplinary action. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News. On December 4th, the power company and union leaders signed an agreement concerning the utility's gloving policy. That policy requires linemen to be trained to handle live power lines in excess of 4,000 volts. The linemen objected to the policy and voiced their disapproval last November 23rd in a one-day wildcat strike. But the workers were ordered to go back to work the next day. They did, and both parties agreed to continue training the linemen until an arbitration board settled the gloving policy. The board meets next month. But now, union leaders claim the power company broke its promise not to discipline the workers when it fired 8 members, suspended 670, and sent letters of reprimand to 2,200 workers. But power company officials say their agreement made no promise of withholding disciplinary action. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
Since the state bans games of chance, counties wanting to allow bingo for charity have to get an exemption. Representative Charles Langford has offered 2 bills which would provide the exemption from Montgomery County in the form of an amendment to the Constitution and set up rules controlling who can play the game. Bingo came to a screeching halt several years ago when Montgomery District Attorney Jimmy Evans cracked down on illegal organized bingo operations. Since Montgomery County doesn't have an exemption for charitable groups, those nonprofit games were stopped as well. Bingo for charity bills didn't get far last year because of insistence by former Senator Bishop Barron that organizations have an IRS tax exemption to qualify. There are a couple of nonprofit groups wanting to be included that don't have the IRS number, so the bills died. But Barron is no longer in the Senate, and this set of bingo bills aren't as restrictive, and none of the current Montgomery County legislators appear to want to enforce the IRS requirement. A proposed bill that would indirectly affect Montgomery County is being offered by Representative Jack Biddle. His bill would take the authority over gun control legislation away from cities and municipalities and place it solely in the hands of the legislature. All but 3 representatives, including Alvin Holmes, have signed the bill, which, if passed, would stop efforts like Montgomery City Councilman Donald Watkins to control the possession and sale of guns in the city. Biddle's bill is expected to be introduced next Tuesday. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
Apparently we had a gas explosion in the rear of the house. The damage from the explosion was major damage. The fire damage was minor. We responded 2 engine companies, 1 paramedic, 1 chief's car. It took approximately 5 to 7 minutes to bring the fire under control. The occupant of the house received burns on his hands and face, 2nd degree mostly on his face. The damage to the entire structure would be classified as moderate damage.
Well, the manufacturers want to see what it'll do, the body people, the chassis people, the engine people, and mainly the drivers. And I'll tell you, they're coming from everywhere.
It is a fast car, I understand.
It's a very fast car. Just this past Monday, Darrell Waltrip set it 172.8 miles an hour over at Atlanta Raceway, the same automobile that'll be racing here this weekend.
And that was much faster than the track record?
The track record over there is 168, so he went nearly 5 miles an hour faster in the 82 Camaro, and basically because of the aerodynamics of the automobile.
Okay, the aerodynamics will not help that much on your track, but it will make a difference, huh?
It will make a difference, Phil. Yes, sir.
Okay. And then there'll be a Firebird in the field, too, huh?
Yes, sir. Alan Kowicki from Milwaukee's coming down in an 82 Firebird, basically the same aerodynamics as the Camaro. And Freddie Fryer from Beaumont, Texas, will be subbing for Darrell Waltrip behind the wheel of the Camaro automobile.
Pardon the pun, but the Cardinals are flying high. Louisville is 23-9 with 3 NCAA tournament victories.
This is the same team that was 12-8 with 4 straight defeats at one point in the season. This is also the same team that's going to the Superdome.
But for all the excitement and success the Mideast Regional Champ Cards have had, it could come to an end quickly Saturday. Louisville faces West Regional winners Georgetown. The 29-6 Hoyas have one of the best guards in the country in Eric Sleepy Floyd. But Georgetown presents a much bigger problem to Louisville, specifically 7-footer Patrick Ewing. Ewing scores only about 13 a game, but is a tremendous intimidator on the floor.
He's more of a force than Brewer. Brewer's a pretty good player, but Ewing is more active and a good shot blocker and loves to dunk the ball. And I feel that whoever we put on him is going to have a problem.
He's prone to freshman mistakes, and he's prone for foul trouble, and I hope that's what happens to him.
Louisville versus Georgetown. Game 2 in the semifinals of the NCAA tournament Saturday in New Orleans.
By the time they got to the third game this afternoon, Huntington had already claimed their own classic. They did that in the second game with a 10-5 win over Warren Wilson College. And they made it a complete sweep with a 7-0 whipping of Kentucky State in Game 3. The Hawks jumped on Kentucky State in the first inning. Center fielder Polo Jackson led the inning off with a walk, stole second, and then scored on this single to right by first baseman Doug Singleton, making it 1-0 Hawks. Huntington added 3 more in the second when Kentucky State pitcher McKinley McRae walked the first 3 batters to load the bases. Catcher Terry Wallace then ripped this double to left, scoring Paul Cope and Donnie Kaysen. Shortstop Bill Beard followed that with a single to left. That scored David Rhodes, making it 4-0 Huntington. The Hawks also picked up single runs in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th innings and got 1-hit pitching from Chris Gale in cruising to the 7-0 win. Huntington captured their first Huntington Classic. They improved to 18-7 overall. The Hawks are back in action tomorrow afternoon at home with a doubleheader against Kalamazoo College. Rick Pons, WSFA TV Sports.
Brubaker Junior High School is under construction behind Brubaker Elementary School near Bell Road in Montgomery. When it's completed, the Brubaker School Parent-Teacher Association would like to see a community center built at the school, an effort expected to cost between $700,000 and $800,000. In seeking to fund the project, the PTA has sought the help of the city and the county. So far, PTA representatives say the city has promised $400,000 for the project, and the county commission, when told the city would supply half the money, pledged $200,000 toward the community center. But the chairman of the Montgomery City Council, Willie Peake, says there is a snag.
Okay, at this particular time, there is not an official commitment from the city of Montgomery to the Brubaker Community Centers at this particular time.
Peake says the year's budget for the city is set, and for any money to be approved for the community center building project at Brubaker, Montgomery Mayor Emery Falmer will have to recommend the expenditure to the council, and the council will have to approve it. Neither of those actions has occurred. But when the PTA went before the county commission, PTA representatives said they had a commitment from the city. A spokesman for the PTA, John Morgan, says what the Brubaker PTA really has is a promise from Mayor Falmer to make a recommendation to have the money appropriated. Morgan says he doesn't think there has been any deception, that he feels Falmer's promise of a recommendation is a commitment from the city. Meanwhile, Peake says the only official contact the council has had about the community center came in a proposed resolution introduced last week, saying if the county commission will give $300,000 to the project, the city will pay for the rest. That resolution will be considered by the Council Finance Committee next week. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
And any changes in the budget.
She's been referred to by some as super teacher, by others as a hoax. In Atmore, Alabama, there's nothing but praise and admiration for Marva Collins. It's her hometown, and March 26 has been proclaimed Marva Collins Day here. The source of Miss Collins' notoriety is far removed from her small Atmore community, the west side of Chicago.
Pay attention to me.
It was here, motivated by a dissatisfaction with her own children's education, that Marva Collins founded the West Side Preparatory School. In its 7 years of life, West Side Prep has gained a reputation of turning the area's tough young punks into learned scholars. Recently, Chicago and national media questioned the alleged success of the school. It, along with Miss Collins, was labeled a hoax, such as the price of notoriety. This message Miss Collins passed along to the student body at Atmore's Escambia County High School.
You will find that others in life will always know what is better for each of you than you will know yourself. However, I leave you with the challenge today to never, never allow anyone to wriggle down inside of your skin to tell any of you what you can or what you cannot do.
Adverse publicity has hurt Marva Collins. No one seems to know about it in Atmore, and no one seems to care.
In the daylight hours of the next morning, he proceeded to tie our hands behind us and clean out his trunk and tell us why he had to kill us.
I still can't understand what I thought at the time that she was being raped and she was being murdered, that I would have felt something, but I didn't.